Thank you for that introduction. I want to start out by talking about labels. Everybody tries to label me in Congress, and they're not quite sure what to call me. Some people say, oh, he's a constitutional conservative, don't worry. Some people call me one of those right-wing fanatics, libertarian-leaning Republican. That one's kind of nice, got a nice ring to it. But the one I like the best that they call me a lot of times in Congress is one of those 12 guys that didn't vote for John Boehner. So tonight they've asked me to share a little bit of the inside baseball in Congress, which is a pretty good analogy because Congress is like a t-ball game. I used to coach t-ball. When a kid hits the ball to the outfield, all the kids that aren't playing in the dirt, where do they go? They go running to the outfield. And it's what happens in Congress. When an issue gets in the news, everybody drops what they're doing and they go running after the ball in the outfield. So I'll give you some of the inside baseball, or in the case of Congress, the inside t-ball. First thing I want to tell you is how we vote. Now in the Senate, they do the roll call. You've heard them read off all 100 names. Well, we've got 435 in the House. So we use this, it's an electronic card. And I'd love to cut it open and figure out how to get 2 or 3 votes out of this thing. I'm pretty sure I could do it. The way it works is you put it in the machine and you press, there's actually 3 buttons. There's yay and nay because the Constitution says you shall register the yays and nays. So they put yay and nay. But the buttons are green and red if you got to Congress and can't read. But the other day, and this has some kind of RFID or some kind of magnetic stripe. The other day I was in a restaurant and I offered to pick up the tab and I handed it to a waitress. And she went and swiped it. She didn't say anything to me. Looked like a fancy credit card to her. And she brings it back and told me it was rejected. And I was devastated. I thought I'd given her my real credit card. And I said, why was it rejected? Did it say anything on your little machine? And she said, she showed me the card. She said, sir, this one's already got $17 trillion on it. And that is a true story. So here, how does voting in Congress work? All right, there's something called the whip. Does anybody know what the whip is? All right, so there are 3 positions in leadership if you're in the majority. There's the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader, and the Majority Whip. And so the process of whipping is where they go around and count votes. And just a show of hands, have any of you ever worked in a campaign before? So a lot of you have. And if you've made phone calls, what do you do when you make the phone calls? The first set of phone calls that go out is voter ID. You're trying to find out, are you for my candidate? Are you for the other candidate? Or are you undecided? And this is what the whip does. He goes around and he counts the votes. And actually, there are 50 deputy whips that work for the whip because you couldn't possibly go count 233 votes, given they're only going to give us 3 hours to read the bill. But so they go around, and if you whip yes, they never come back and see you. If you whip no, they don't. They're going to concentrate on you because the presumption is this is a bill they want to pass. They don't want to be surprised. They don't want to bring a bill to the floor and try and pass it if it's not going to pass. And that's happened to them a few times this year. Because we've stood up on some of these issues. But they like to whip the vote. And I want to tell you a few stories about how I've been whipped or when I've been whipped. It sounds like a bad thing. I'm keeping this, the context is Congress. So we had this, just last week, they came to me with the food stamp bill. My deputy whip, you've always got the same deputy whip, he came up to me. And my legislative director texted me literally 3 minutes before I got whipped. She said, watch out, they're coming to whip you on the food stamp bill. And I said, has it been written yet? And she said, no, they haven't given us any text. And I said, well, wait till they come and ask me how I'm going to vote. So they came, and this is on the floor. You know, it's really noisy on the floor of the House. There's no assigned seating. It's just like in here tonight. You came and you sat down wherever you wanted. That's the way it is in the House. And then if you notice on C-SPAN, when there are people in the room, none of them are sitting down. They're all going and talking to each other. But my whip came to whip me, and there were 10 people standing there. And he says, well, how are you going to vote on the food stamp bill? And I said, has it been written? He said, no. He said, we got some talking points to show you. And I said, well, I'm not going to whip on this then. And he said, can I put you down as undecided then? And I said, no, you can't put me down for anything. I'm not going to whip on a bill that's not been written. That's ridiculous. So that's an instance of when they whip you. What they're trying to do is get your commitment to be a good team player for something you've not read yet. And then when you read it, you'll be less likely to change your mind if you've already told them that you would vote for it. But the best whip story I have happened the first week I was in Congress. I went in, sat down on the floor, I voted. It was a no vote. I think there were only a few of us, maybe Justin Amash and Walter Jones and Paul Brown, myself. But I was the new guy, and I voted no, and I sat down. And the whip staff, there was a lady that came up to me, not even a member of Congress. Their staff are allowed on the floor, my staff are not. She comes up to me and she said, sir, she pointed up the board, she said, you voted no on this bill. I said, oh, did I? I said, that's what I meant to do. And she said, well, the party is, leadership's voting yes on this, and the party wants you to vote, yes. And I said, well, I think I'll vote no. And she said, well, there's a table over there, and that's where the leadership's table is. There's some staff over there that can explain to you what's in the bill. I said, I read the bill. I know what's in it. That's why I'm voting no. And she said, well, you know what? We're not whipping the vote on this today, so you can vote how you want to this evening. I mean, I was floored. Here was a staff member that was telling me I could vote how I wanted because they weren't going to count this one today. So that's how whipping works. I like to use analogies. The next analogy I want to use is one of my favorites. Have any of you seen the Walking Dead series on TV? All right. My kids and I love watching zombie movies, but it's great for understanding Congress, okay? It's like at the beginning of the season, at the beginning of the whole series, there's a lot of people who aren't zombies yet, okay? And that's when these guys come to Congress and they're freshmen, they have the best intentions. They actually believe in what they campaigned on, okay? They still believe what's on their website and printed on their handout cards. But just like TV, each episode, you tune in every week to see who turns into a zombie this week. One of the good guys gets bitten, and that happens in Congress. There'll be like somebody who's good, they came there, they campaigned on all the right issues, and they just get bitten. And there's really nothing you can do for them at that point. There's still your, wait. They're still your friend, and they're nice, and they still look human. They're not dexterous enough to hit the no button anymore, though, when they vote. And I've always said, you don't know at this point whether to hug them or hit them with a baseball bat. But everybody keeps telling me use the baseball bat. So how can you recognize zombie behavior if they're voting on bills they haven't read? If they walk into the House of Representatives and they look up at the board and they pick their 5 friends and they see how they're voting, and then they just press the button. And you go ask them, why did you vote that way? And they're like, I don't know, what are we voting on today? That's a zombie. Or if they always whip yes. They've essentially taken that card and they've now just given it to leadership. I'm with you. Whichever way you say, I'm on Team Red, I got the red shirt now, that's me. And then there are ways that they also influence zombies, and I get into that. If you're assigned to an A committee, and we'll talk about how the committee assignments work later, but the committees are ranked in Congress based on the desire of lobbyists to donate to you once you get on that committee. So in other words, their fundraising potential. So the A committees are Ways and Means, Energy and Commerce, Appropriations. These are the taxes, the regulations, and the money spending. And now, since the bank bailouts, the Finance Committee has become an A committee because all the banks and lending institutions and anything that has to do with money that might get a bailout someday wants to give money to those candidates that are on that committee. So, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Let me talk about some of the votes that we've had. We had a debt limit vote. Do you all remember this? This was January 23rd, and they're trying to break in some of the new guys and gals into the zombie mode. So they didn't want to let them go very long without having to raise the debt ceiling. So they were sworn in on January 3rd, and on January 23rd, most of them still didn't have all their staff hired. They're operating without much staff. The leadership came to us and said, we're not going to raise the debt limit. We know you all campaigned and said you wouldn't raise the debt limit. We're going to suspend the debt limit. So you don't have to vote to raise the debt limit. We'll just suspend it. And they attached a few bright, shiny objects to the bill, too, as enticements to vote for it. For instance, did you hear no budget, no pay? Did anybody hear that tweeted out or on a Facebook? That was the slogan they came up. Guess what? There's still no budget, and we're still getting paid. Even though the law that we wrote says you have to pass a budget in order to get paid. Well, all it did was force the Senate to pass the budget and the House to pass a budget. And, of course, the Senate version raises taxes and increases the debt. And the House version is not much better, unfortunately. It takes 10 years to balance if it ever would. But those budgets have never been resolved, and they've never been passed, and that's why we're talking about a CR now. But they attached that bright, shiny object. It resonated back in these freshmen's districts. No budget, no pay. Yeah, I can go back to my town hall. I can sell that. Nice, bright, shiny object. Put that on there, and I'll vote to suspend the debt limit. The other thing was, we're not going to give them a certain amount of money. We're going to set the time on May 19th. We're just going to suspend the debt limit until May 19th. And then we'll have that battle then, because it's too early. You've only been here 20 days. You're not ready for a debt limit battle. We'll suspend it to May 19th. And we said, well, why don't we limit the amount of money instead of setting the date? And they said, well, we have to control the date. We want the battle to happen on May 19th. There was no battle on May 19th. Some of us stood up in conference where there's no media and there are no staff there, and it's not embarrassing to say what you think to the leadership. We said, look, they've got these extra fuel tanks, these reserve measures, extraordinary measures. If we just set the date at May 19th, they'll fill up all the fuel tanks, they'll fill up all the spare tanks, and when we get to May 19th, we won't have the battle. They'll get into probably July, maybe August with those reserves. Guess we're going to be in October. We were told in those meetings, nope, you're wrong. We got this under control May 19th. So anyways, they got a lot of freshmen who said they would never vote for a debt limit increase to vote for a debt limit increase. And that's how they did it. And that's how you start becoming a zombie, when they start convincing you to do these things. The Syria issue, I can tell you, I don't know where they got these polls, but it says that 25% of the public's for getting involved in Syria and 75%'s not. Every congressman I've spoken to, and goes for my office as well, there were 99 calls against for every one call we got for getting engaged in Syria. But how many congressmen did you see on TV saying, well, I'm undecided? And this happened during the recess. There was 5 weeks we were back in our districts. I'm still undecided. I need to go back to Washington, D.C. and talk with the people in the know, and then I'll form an opinion, but I can't be decided right now. And let me tell you why they said that and why that's so effective, and this gets to the NSA. One of the ways that they will try and convince you to vote a certain way when you're up there, if you've whipped leans no or whipped undecided, they bring you into a classified briefing, like with the NSA. And they bring in the generals and the director of national intelligence, and these are the guys that you've seen on TV all your life. And now they're sitting there and they're talking to you one-on-one, and they're just telling you like it is, and this is a classified briefing. Frankly, almost everything they tell you in those briefings you can read on Drudge Report 5 minutes earlier. But now you've been endowed with special knowledge. And so it's okay if 99% of your constituents say to do one thing and you decide something else, because now you have the special knowledge. And it's okay for you to vote against your constituents in a way that they wouldn't want you to vote. Because you know what? They didn't elect you to come up here and vote based on what they know. They elected you to come up here and form an opinion based on information they can't possibly obtain. and do that for them. And that's the line they sell, and that's why you had so many people go off track on the NSA vote. We had them in classified briefings. But it's been pretty hilarious. Every time they do a classified briefing, they have to have another one a week later after something leaks out to show that they had lied to us in the week before. But that's what they did. That's what they did on the NSA. That's what they were trying to do on Syria. And frankly, they told us there were 54 terrorist incidents that were stopped by this domestic spying program. Well, we challenged them on all of them. And in one of those classified briefings, we finally got them to admit there was only one incident that this program pertained to, and they actually knew about it through other routes. So, but we finally got them to admit that. And there are people who voted, again, once a zombie, it's hard to come back, but there were people who had already voted for CISPA, and they could see this was basically the same thing. But, that's what CISPA was. It was authorizing this program. It was absolving all the private companies of any liability if they cooperated with the government in destroying your constitutional rights. So, hey, I've already voted for CISPA, and now they're telling me all this secret information about how good this program is. I'll vote for NSA. But there are a lot of congressmen now that went back to their districts and got put through the wood chipper at the town halls. It's kind of like NASCAR. Some people just watch NASCAR for the wrecks. I go on YouTube and watch some of these town halls just for the wrecks. And I'm thinking, gosh, I hope that's not me. But as long as you vote right, you don't have to worry about going to your town halls. If you do what your constituents would have you do. So let me get to some of these issues and how they steer the zombies. And then I also want to tell you how you can steer the zombies. And you are. I mean, they're influenceable. They don't like daylight. We all know that. So one of the things that I had this notion before I went to Congress that money was somehow corrupting the process. But I didn't understand it until I got to Congress. And I was sat down in a meeting, and I was told what my quota was. And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, if you want to be on these committees, this is your quota. Now, if you want to be on this committee, here's your quota. This is how much money you have to raise every quarter and give to the party. By the way, I have to tell you something a little bit refreshing. They also have sort of this wall of shame in the GOP conference. So you go in there, and there's your name, and there's your quota, and there's how much you raised for the NRCC, and there's how much you have left to raise. Well, I got to go to Congress 6 weeks early because I filled an unexpired term of a previous congressman. So I got to serve with the venerable Ron Paul for 6 weeks and sit next to him in the halls of Congress. But I went in that room and I saw his name on that list, and he was on the wall of shame. He had raised zero money for the NRCC. So I thought this might be the wall of fame, in fact. But anyways, you have a quota assigned based on which committee you get on. And so congressmen, they don't actually get rich. I mean, it seems like some senators have. Haven't figured out how they've done it. But congressmen they're not buying yachts and Ferraris and things like that. What are they doing with the money? Well, their reelection is virtually assured. I mean, they've been there, forever. They've been there forever, and they don't have to worry about a reelection. Why are they raising money? Why are they doing it? Now, some of it, of course, they're raising it because they've got a quota because they're on a good committee and they have to raise a lot of money to stay on that good committee. And now maybe you know why some people didn't get to keep their committees. But you have to raise a lot of money to stay on the committee. But money is not what you go buy a yacht with. It's not what you get reelected with. It's how you influence other congressmen, because that's the currency of influence. If you've got enough money in your account to go give 100 other congressmen $2,000 and then $5,000 from your leadership PAC and then $2,000 from the general election, and you can put, $9,000 in their account. It's really, unless you're just a mean person, it's hard to separate that. You feel ingratiated almost to the person after that. And so when they come and ask you for a favor, they ask you just to consider something, it's really hard to turn them away. And this is, humans are frail individuals, are frail beings. And that's what you have in Congress. There are 435 frail human beings who have all the same emotions and feelings that you have. And that they use all of those emotions to influence you. And so one of the ways they do it is they give you money and you feel indebted to them. They'll come and do a fundraiser for you, or they'll give it to the party. They'll just write a big fat check from their account to the party's account. Now, I'm being tough on my own party because that's what I know, but I can assure you the Democrats do exactly the same thing. And it's a big football game. I think it's probably worse in the House than it is the Senate, because if you're in the minority in the Senate, you have some rights. But if you're in the minority in the House, I guess you just buy your staff an Xbox and tell them to have fun for that Congress. Because none of your bills are really going to get passed. It's hard to get anything done in the minority. That's why there's this big struggle, and that's how the money comes into it, and that's how it's the currency of influence among congressmen. Now, what else influences congressmen? Well, some zombies are just too far gone. You can't help them. But there are outside groups that really have more influence than you know. Like, for instance, Campaign for Liberty is one. Freedom Works is one. Club for Growth is one. Those are the good ones. I'm going downhill a little bit now. No, Heritage is one. Those organizations have influence over congressmen, and there are different kinds of scorecards. Have you ever seen a scorecard and you go on and you see, okay, how did my congressman do on the scorecard? Well, I've got good news and bad news. I've got a 95% score on Freedom Works on their scorecard. Now, that's pretty good, but I think they could do better. They're wrong 5% of the time. And Club for Growth's the same way. Heritage, I've got like an 86, but that's because, and I encourage you, even if you believe the scorecard, go look at what they're scoring, okay? Because they're not always scoring an issue that matters to you or a vote that you would take. Let me give you an example of something that got scored the wrong way. There was a bill on the floor introduced by a really good Congressman, Tom McClintock, that would prioritize our payments if we ever hit the debt limit. Now, doesn't that make sense? Like, instead of just Chicken Little, the sky's falling, we're going to default, why don't we pay the interest on the debt? Why don't we pay our Social Security obligations? We could pay the military. We could pay all these things. We have over $2 trillion coming in every year. Just because you can't borrow more money doesn't mean you can't spend the money that's coming in. So his bill would have prioritized spending. This thing was awesome. Justin Amash co-sponsored it. I didn't co-sponsor it yet, but I went back to my district and talked about it on radio shows. We absolutely need to do this. We convinced Club for Growth and Heritage to score this bill, to put it on their scorecard. And we got back, and the day before we voted, we took a look at the bill. They changed every word in it. They took every word that Tom McClintock had put in that bill and substituted it in the Rules Committee with a different bill. It still said prioritization, but it didn't prioritize payments when you hit the debt ceiling. It exempted things from the debt ceiling calculation. So it exempted interest on the debt. It exempted Social Security. And you could do the math. I sat down and spent a few hours doing the math on this. At some point in the future, the debt limit would disappear. If your interest is as big as your annual deficit, if your annual interest payment, and your annual interest payment's not subject to the calculation, then you don't care about the debt limit. And it goes away. It was probably the worst bill that I've ever seen us vote on. But we went and we screamed at these groups, don't score it, don't score it, it's horrible. Look at what they did. They changed every word in it. And they said, well, we've got so much time and effort invested in telling people to call their congressman and to score this, we just can't change right now. So they scored against us. There were only myself, Amash, and Walter Jones were the only Republicans that voted against that bill. And that's why on some of these scorecards we don't have 100%, because sometimes these groups don't read the bills. So that's just, and there's two different kinds of scorecards. There's a score for two different purposes. There's scorecards that are unannounced. The groups score it after the vote, and there are ones that are announced. The ones that are announced are to steer the zombies. I had a congressman, I went up to him, I'm not going to rat him out. He took a really brave vote back in December. I was astonished. I didn't really know this guy, but I got to know him because he took a really brave vote, and he was one of like 13 no's. But he kind of got squishy after that. And I couldn't figure out why he's squishing out on many of the same issues. And so I just went up to him. I didn't say, why are you a squish now? I said, gee, you took a brave vote back then. Why did you go with us on that vote? He said, well, I'm no dummy. I know what side my bread's buttered on, and Club for Growth scored that vote. And they had helped him get elected. So you don't underestimate the amount of power you have if you help somebody get elected, or if you're working for somebody that could unelect that individual by beating them in a primary or general. Don't underestimate the power that you have, not during the election, but during Congress. When you call up these people, they'll also come and vote, and before they press the yay or no, they'll ask me, how many calls did you get on this? Which way did the calls go? So the phone calls matter. Definitely make phone calls. I'm running out of time, so I'll say this about staff. Staff is crucial to congressional office. I thought maybe I'd get 1 or 2 staff members. I had no idea what kind of budget we had and how much help I could hire. Each congressman has about 16 staff members. And there are nominally 8 in the district back home and 8 in D.C. And really, staff sets your policy. They help read the bills. When you get an 800-page bill and less than 3 days to read it, you need your staff to help you go through that and find the bad stuff and show it to you. And if you get bad staff, you're going to get bad results. You're going to make bad votes. You're going to make mistakes. So I was really careful in picking my staff. The other thing you can't do, you can't just pick all of one type of person to be in your staff. You got to have some diversity to represent all of the people that you're going to represent. So I tried to get a lot of diversity in my staff. Of the 8 that I hired in D.C., I made sure not to be all the same kind. Half of them are Ron Paul people, and the other half are Rand Paul people. And somewhere in that broad spectrum, I think we probably covered the people in this room. And one quick thing about staff. I guess this is really my timer here. It says I got 1 minute and 43 seconds. The other dysfunctional thing you have about staff is your district staff doesn't talk to your D.C. staff. And you got to make sure, because Washington, D.C. is virtual reality, and back in the district is reality. And they're doing 2 different functions. One's writing and reading legislation. The other is dealing with constituents, veterans benefits and things like that. I thought it was important to make sure my staff got off to the right start, so I wanted them all to spend a few days together, so I invited them to my farm in Kentucky. So we had them all back on my farm. We had lots of fun. We shot machine guns. We roasted a pig. We did some really cool stuff. But where do you put 16 people when you invite them over to your house? It's really hard to find a place for 16 people to sleep. The barn, yeah. It was almost the barn. We put all the guys. We've got a double wide that we put deer hunters in when they come to hunt on our farm. My wife calls it the double lodge because it's like a deer lodge. But we put all the guys there. We got bunk beds. And I told my wife, I'm not going to make the women on our staff sleep in a deer lodge with deer antlers everywhere and stuff like that. So I said, we'll kick the kids out of their bedrooms. And I've got 4 kids, and 2 of them have bunk beds. That's a lot of sleeping room. And my 9-year-old daughter, I've got a 17-year-old, 15-year-old, 13-year-old, and a 9-year-old. My 9-year-old daughter, she's really spunky. This year she tried out for cheerleading and basketball, made both teams, and she's the smallest kid in the class. But she's also good at espionage. She was eavesdropping on when I was telling my wife where we were going to put these strange people when they came to our farm. And she comes out of the shadows and exposed herself. And she put her hand on her hip, and she said, "Dad, are you telling me you're going to kick me out of my bedroom for your DC staff?" I said, "I'm sorry, honey. There's no hotels around here. They got to sleep somewhere." And she said, "But what you're really telling me is government's getting in my bedroom." And my wife and I looked at each other and were like, "Oh my gosh, as long as she thinks that's the context for that statement, I'm okay with it." But I see my time has expired. I'd hope to leave time for questions. I don't know if we can take a few. Whoever is the moderator can decide that or not. But I really appreciate your support. A lot of you worked hard to get me elected. A lot of you are sending good candidates to Washington, D.C., getting them elected. We need reinforcements. Yeah, I'll make you a deal. If you send them to Washington, D.C., I'll show them how to outrun the zombies, okay? But listen, they got to have a spine. Don't send me one without a spine. And later tonight, you're going to hear from a guy that's got a spine, Steve Stockman.